I'm going to start off introducing social realism by explaining the definition of this movement, its influences, and other art movements that complement or contradict it. Social realism started in Europe in the 1800s as a European crusade to bring paintings away from romantic ideas and idealized settings. Furthermore, in American culture, social realism is defined by its message and political leanings, rather than its style. This explains why many artists paint with different techniques and use different mediums. This art movement depicts social and racial injustice and economic hardships through pictures of life struggles. When I was doing my research, I came across a French word, tromper l'œil, which means to deceive the eye. This relates to social realism because artists try to make the highly detailed paintings of the object as real as the object itself, just like a picture. This art movement is mainly recognized as the artwork during the Great Depression. These artists were devoted to portraying the social troubles of urban lower class, urban decay, labor strikes, and poverty. Social realists are artists that draw attention to everyday conditions of the working and lower classes. They also focus on issues such as the oppression of women, prejudice against immigrants, and discrimination against racial minorities. Social realism first started in the United States in the late 1800s. The Panic of 1873 had devastating effects on labor movements and the conditions of the working classes. There were many pay cuts and the unemployment rose. One key artist during this time was Pollock and Schutz, who is credited as linking early social realism with later social realism. In his paintings, he does not glorify the Protestant work ethic because there are no smiles. The ironworkers are all somber and tense. Schutz also used nude to show idealized presentation of movement and struggles of the working class. This was the first time that an artist used nude as a negative. He used it as a compromise between symbolism and realism. Schutz also followed the beliefs by Thomas Jefferson by portraying workers as a new type of democratic hero. Jefferson once said, "Labor is man's highest calling," and Carlyle once said, "Work alone is noble." Although Pollock and Schutz is recognized as linking the old with the new, the Hudson River School is credited as the first form of American social realism from 1840 until 1860. The Hudson River School was not actually a school, but an American art movement that depicted mainly landscape scenes as realistic as possible. There were two types of artists in the late 1800s. The old artists belonged to the National Academy of Design and the new artists belonged to the Society of American Artists. The rise of the new artists was the end of the Romanticism period. The generation of 1876 included working men and women, immigrants, African Americans, waifs, orphans, poor, and the dispossessed. This whole list of people were neglected and ignored as citizens. These groups were the first themes of many of the social realists, including the new artists. One of the most influential new artists was Homer. His work was the first time an artist drew the comparison between the rich and the poor. For example, the Morning Bell gives a little hint of severity of the inside of the factory. The painting is calm, with light flowy colors, and the workers look content and relaxed. He then came out with a wood engraving, also titled The Morning Bell, but this time it is closer to the factory. It is more grim, which you can see with the barred windows. He also introduced a man and a barefooted boy. The women who were in the previous painting are now hunched over and the bell on top of the factory is sounding. The bell in his work symbolize factory work. The bell signals when work begins and when it ends. The worker's whole life revolves around the bell. Industrialization and urbanization of post-Civil War America was a change in lifestyle from rural sun time to urban clock time. Homer alone captured the strength, beauty, and spirit of men. When people typically paint seamen on the ocean, the focus is on the strength and power of the water and the waves. Homer contradicts this norm by focusing on the strength and power of the men in the water. Another influencing group on American social realism was the Muckrakers. This group's work identified with the oppressed, downtrodden, and the working class. The Muckrakers soon developed into the Ashcan School. Students from the Ashcan School, such as Robert Henry, scandalized the art community by going against the accepted view of the time and painting prize fighters and other not-so-pleasant scenes. Instead of painting beautiful and flowery landscapes, they painted brutal and unpleasant environments, with loosely drawn shapes and bold contrast in light and shading. In addition to the American social realists, many unrecognized social realists were immigrants who came to America and lived in the urban environments. Social realism allows for subjectivity because it shows actuality of what our eye sees. There are no impressions or feelings involved in the artwork. It is a type of art that moves away from abstractionism greatly. There are many themes of social realism. The working class was for the first time looked at as heroes and showed the genius in engineering. This included plights of laborers and disenfranchised individuals. Social realism portrayed the unemployed and homeless with deep empathy and with a keen understanding that their plight resulted from institutional breakdown rather than personal moral failure. The majority of works embodied a naive form of social realism, inspiring Americans to reflect on their heritage of revolution, hard work, and religion in an attempt to bring back prosperity. On politics, social realism satirized those in political and economic power who used their positions to oppress others and to engage in graft and corruption. The main social realism movement started because of the Great Depression, the Mexican Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. We will go in greater depth of these influences later, but first I will compare and contrast the other art movements to social realism. Regionalists of this time included Grant Wood, John Stewart, Curry, and Thomas Hart Benton. Regionalists portrayed the better, more optimistic side of social realism. Regionalists are also recognized as naturalists. These regionalists painted largely rural scenes, and through their works they usually praised the fecundity of the earth, the joys of planting, or the stability of rural institutions. The regionalist atheistic Coset in the 1920s and 1930s flourished until the 1940s. The technological advances that so often beguiled the social realists had no effect on them. Instead, they painted an America that had only been superficially changed by the Industrial Revolution. Regionalists also depicted local Midwestern imagery in contrast to the urban cities of the social realists. Although it had less of a lasting influence than social realism, the two movements were similar in that artists painted local scenes while capturing the universal significance of the subject. Naturalist is a form of regionalist where artists depict actual subjects in realistic ways, including everyday scenes. However, naturalists and regionalists differ from social realists because with social realists, artists depict the struggles of one class and one group of people at a time and compare them to the other classes and other groups of people. Social realism is also connected to idealism. In idealism, experience is ultimately based on mental activity. Idealism is related to romanticism